was online a couple of years ago at around 1 a.m. looking up old Spongebob episodes as I was a huge fan as a kid, and the new episodes they show on TV are complete and utter garbage. So after going through some bad quality videos on some foreign websites and other sites flooded with ads, I came across an unofficial website that had full episodes, ad-free. Okay, well, the quality wasn't exactly the best, but it was definitely a lot better than most of the websites I'd been on so far. On the bottom was a link that said SpongeBob Lost Episode. Being the idiot that I am, I clicked on it and thought it was probably either a screamer or something like that. But I clicked on it anyway. I was relatively bored enough to click on the video to watch it. I had actually totally forgotten about looking for older episodes. The episode's video had extremely poor quality, and the episode itself was pretty much forgotten by the writers. Like every episode, it started with the main theme song. The title card read Patrick's Leg, with the normal fun-filled bubble letters we all know and love. The first thing that didn't exactly seem right with this episode was that after the title card, the transition, instead of bubbles, was just a blur in the beginning of the episode. It started out like a harmless SpongeBob episode with SpongeBob and Patrick watching the sunset, but then Patrick decided to go sandboarding, so they do. So far, a pretty normal episode. Patrick then tries to do some sort of trick on his sandboard but fails. As a result, Patrick falls and breaks his leg, and SpongeBob goes after him to see if he's okay. During the scene, instead of the usual Hawaiian-themed music, more suspenseful, serious music plays. Also, Patrick screams a more painful scream than he usually would. Well, enough that I could feel it. In retrospect, I guess that makes sense. I mean, he just broke his leg. Nothing that's too far out of the ordinary, right? Well, other than the opening and the music in that one scene, it was pretty much going on like an ordinary episode. The next scene takes place in the hospital, where the doctor tells Patrick he needs to be in a wheelchair for a little while. As they walk out, SpongeBob is pushing Patrick in his wheelchair, and they run into some girls. The girls start talking to Patrick because of his leg, and ask if they could sign his cast, and later on, they wind up walking away with Patrick, leaving SpongeBob by himself. So far, going like a normal episode. I don't really remember what happened throughout the episode, so I'll just skip a couple of scenes. This is where it got really odd. Later that night, SpongeBob knocks on Patrick's door, and in this scene, the backgrounds look a little bit more realistic than usual. However, I tried to ignore it. When Patrick opened the door, SpongeBob immediately tells Patrick that he forbids him to see the girls ever again. Patrick gets furious, not like he usually does. There's a more realistic anger to it, and he tells SpongeBob that he hates him. The girls proceed to leave in fear. This is when I started to feel funny about this episode. SpongeBob then screams in an unusually deep voice something like, "Oh yeah? Well, as long as you hate me, I can do this!" And he starts beating Patrick's broken leg violently with a rock. After that, the screen goes to static for a fraction of a second, and cuts to a scene where SpongeBob and Patrick are apologizing for something during the daytime, except the lighting in this animation and the voices don't match up. The animation in the scene is also very poor, as if it were on a loop, and it goes like this for a good 4 or 5 minutes. I was a little bit creeped out, but I wanted to see how it ended. The screen goes black for a minute or so, and then cuts to a scene from another episode, where Patrick has Jeffrey Jellyfish in a wagon, and it says, Come on, Jeffrey." And the screen goes black again. This time only for 30 seconds, and it cuts to a CGI animation of Patrick cutting SpongeBob's stomach open with a piece of broken coral with blood gushing out of it, while looking at the screen with bloodshot, dilated eyes. His mouth doesn't move, but you can faintly hear him say, "I knew this day would come," with an echoey voice. You can also hear SpongeBob laughing for some reason. The scene goes on for another 3 minutes, but nothing is heard but static, which gets louder and louder until it's unbearably loud. Then the normal credits come on, but with very faint image of the last scene still showing. My God, that image will stay burnt in my mind forever. The United Plankton logo wasn't shown like usual. After the video was over, I had froze. So, after the video was over, the screen froze, so I had to reload the page, but the video was no longer available. I couldn't even find the website anymore. Even when I looked up Patrick's leg, nothing came up. I understand if you don't believe me, but I know what I saw, even if it was at 1 in the morning. Honestly, though, what the heck was I even doing online at that time to even begin with? And that, my little shadows, was Patrick's Leg, a SpongeBob SquarePants Lost episode creepypasta. My final thoughts on the story? Well, I have to be 100% honest. I remember reading this story about a year or so back, and, my thoughts on the story really haven't changed from then. I actually found this to be an extremely enjoyable creepypasta. Now, I do know that it is rather cliched at parts, especially with the realistic blood and things, but for some odd reason, it doesn't. Whenever I read that, it didn't make me groan or feel like annoyed or anything. It actually, for some reason, it felt like it actually helped the story rather than hurt it. That might be a little bit of a surprise to some of you, but I'm gonna pretty much go into a proper explanation in just a little bit here. But overall, this story itself, really wasn't that bad of a concept. Now, the very startup of this creepypasta was actually pretty good, actually. With the protagonist going around at 1 a.m., literally looking up SpongeBob episodes, literally me every single night before I even go to bed. I'm not joking, too. There's plenty of people, including myself, who have at least one or so time decided to just start looking up old episodes or whatever just for the sake of it. And especially as late as night as we do. Don't say that you haven't done it at least once, and if you say that you haven't, you're probably lying. But still, the idea of it and everything and, having to go to various websites is also very believable as well, because if you've gone on any kind of website out there, not a whole lot of them actually have good quality episodes. I mean, don't even bother going to either YouTube or any other place to find them, because you're not going to find a whole lot of good ones. Now, of course, going off and finding it and everything, and later on finding a link with the SpongeBob Lost episode thing. Now, given how sketchy some of these websites tend to be, which is why I don't really recommend going to them unless you are really careful doing such, the idea of, the person finding, like, a random episode like that is not really that out of the ordinary. I mean, especially given the fact that we really don't know what in the world's going on with the site. It literally could have been anything if, time and effort or whatever. I don't really know. It could have literally been anything. Now, in regards to the actual episode itself, very, very well detailed, actually, I have to admit. The whole concept of it just solely being about Patrick's leg. About, Patrick breaking his leg, and then, well, later on, getting taken away by some girls and things. And I know that there's not really too much of a plot with the whole thing, but genuinely speaking, I actually kind of liked it. Like, the idea of it, being about, Patrick breaking his leg and then SpongeBob getting really angry after he sat there and, likely chances probably from jealousy, to be honest. And I don't really know exactly when this entire thing was made, this entire creepypasta was made, but if it was made sometime around 2012 or so, I could kind of see this being an actual episode, because around that time in SpongeBob's history, it was not going by too well. In fact, a lot of people, including myself, really just did not like the whole thing that was going on with the series. I mean, that's just a full-on fact, to be 100% honest. So the idea of something like this being made isn't really that out of the ordinary for, for producers around that time, but I'm not here to sit there and get, moving on, the grammar is also really good, too. The grammar, the sentence structuring, the paragraph, it's really, really good. In fact, I'd even say that I don't really have much of a problem with it. It actually it's actually really good and detailed, to the point where, again, I can actually visualize what's going on. And, I will admit though, some parts of the story were a little bit confusing. I mean, granted, that's to be expected with one of these kind of stories about, a random video link from an actual place or whatever, but it still is a little bit confusing to understand because what in the world's going on? Now, if I had to decipher a couple of things that were going on within this creepypasta, is that after SpongeBob proceeds to beat Patrick's broken leg with a rock, it later goes to SpongeBob and Patrick apologizing in the daytime. Very, very likely that it was SpongeBob apologizing to Patrick for sitting there and hitting his leg as he did. And of course, probably Patrick apologizing to SpongeBob for the fact that he was probably either ignoring him and hanging out with the girls more often, or something along those lines. Either of those kind of things. Likely chances that probably would have been a little bit of a better explanation, perhaps. But it is understandable why the protagonist probably didn't know what in the world was going on. And the singing quality and everything being relatively poor, again, believable, especially with websites like that. And I like that little, inclusion with the whole Jeffrey Jellyfish and the wagon thing. I mean, I don't know why, it just kind of has like a little bit of a burst of nostalgia to it. Even though it doesn't exactly play out too well with the creepypasta, I actually think that it's an okay inclusion, to be 100% honest. Now, the creepiest part about this is the CG animation. Now, I can't seem to find the screenshot anywhere on this website. Then again, I am using a third-party website like Spongebob to read this story, so it's very much likely that that nobody wanted to include it, or they just didn't feel like including the concept itself. But overall, the whole thing is like really good. And I don't know what in the world caused Patrick to sit there and just like cut open SpongeBob for some odd reason, but let me tell you, that's pretty disturbing for the most part. Especially with the idea of SpongeBob laughing while he did that. I mean, come on people, that's nightmare fuel right there. But still, this was a very good creepypasta, very enjoyable, and for an old one, it's definitely a classic, and I'm glad I'm getting back to actually reading the storyline. Because it really is good. It's a good concept. Cliched, perhaps, yes, but still a relatively enjoyable creepypasta read. Very well detailed, very enjoyable, and it's raining again. Then again, I have a storm literally coming right next to my trailer, so there's that. But still, really well detailed, very enjoyable. I loved it a lot. Yeah, it was a great concept. It was a great story. It was beautifully done. But, like I always say with these creepypastas, this is simply my own personal opinion, and if you disagree with it, that's perfectly fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions in regards to these creepypastas, and this is simply my own personal thoughts. My final rating of the story would have to be a 9 out of 10. A very enjoyable creepypasta, definitely a good old story that actually managed to kind of age properly, shockingly enough, even with the cliches included in it. But the only real negative I can actually give is that I kind of wish that it was a little bit longer, but the real negative I can give with this creepypasta is the fact that, well, there really wasn't much of a plot going for it. And that some parts I was a little bit confused why the protagonist reacted the way that they did.
In fear and surprise as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to leave, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from the fear-gripping portrait. Nightmarish gore filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams, only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at any day.